A season begins. The crisp spring air of London, usually redolent with the scent of fresh blossoms and possibility, carried a faint, almost imperceptible undertone of desperation for Lady Elowen Ashcombe. Not that anyone would ever suspect it by merely observing her. She moved with an innate grace, her posture as straight and unyielding as a marble column, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. This season, her re-entry into the glittering vortex of the Tun felt less like a triumphant return and more like a carefully choreographed dance on the edge of a precipice. Elowen had once been the very embodiment of privilege, the cherished daughter of the Earl of Vellamore. Their ancestral home, a sprawling estate nestled amidst the rolling green hills of Surrey, had echoed with laughter, the clinking of teacups, and the gentle strains of the pianoforte, where she spent countless hours. Her father, a man more inclined to grand visions than meticulous ledgers, had invested, some might say, speculated with an adventurous spirit that ultimately proved to be his undoing. The sudden, brutal collapse of his ventures had been swift and absolute, leaving behind a wreckage of debts and shattered illusions. The title, a stubborn relic of lineage, remained. It clung to them like a silken thread, fragile but stubbornly present. Yet the grand estate, the heart of their family's legacy, had been swallowed whole by creditors, its venerable walls now echoing with the footsteps of strangers. The Ashcombe family, once pillars of the landed gentry, found themselves adrift. Her mother, the Countess, a woman of delicate sensibilities accustomed to the comforts of country living, had taken the fall quite badly, seeking refuge with distant, vaguely disapproving kin in Bath. She seldom ventured to the capital, the thought of facing society's pity or thinly veiled contempt proving too much to bear. And who could blame her? The fall had been precipitous, a public humiliation whispered about in every drawing-room. Elowen, however, bore the burden with a quiet, almost defiant stoicism. She was not one to wilt. Instead, she had cultivated an inner garden of resilience, fertilized by necessity and watered by a burgeoning independence. Her current reintroduction to society was orchestrated by her godmother, the formidable Duchess of Wexford, a woman who wielded influence like a finely crafted weapon. The Duchess was a titaness of the Tun, her pronouncements carrying the weight of royal decree, her social standing as unassailable as the Tower of London. To be sponsored by her was to be given a golden ticket, a tacit endorsement that quelled the more overt forms of societal cruelty. But even the Duchess's considerable shield could not entirely deflect the knowing glances and the insidious whispers. Elowen's gowns, though impeccably fashioned, their silks were perhaps a season or two out of the absolute latest fashion, their lace subtly repurposed from older pieces. But she had stood firm in her refusal of the Duchess's offer to get her new wardrobe for the season. "Being here is more than enough," she had said. The Duchess, understanding her goddaughter's need to retain her pride, had pushed. Her jewels, though genuine, were discreetly modest, a far cry from the glittering cascades of diamonds and rubies that adorned the necks and décolletage of other young ladies of her supposed station. Each subtle detail was a tell-tale sign, a breadcrumb trail for those who delighted in dissecting others' misfortunes. "My dear Elowen," the Duchess had declared, assessing Elowen with a keen eye over a breakfast of lukewarm tea and dry toast, "you carry yourself with the air of a queen. Let no one persuade you otherwise. Your circumstances are merely a temporary inconvenience, a charming anecdote for your future memoirs, nothing more. Elowen had offered a small, grateful smile, knowing full well that temporary inconvenience was a Duchess-ism for catastrophic downfall. Yet, the Duchess's unwavering support was a lifeline. It was a shield, albeit one with visible chinks for the keen-eyed. The whispers, like persistent gnats, followed her everywhere. They buzzed in the corners of ballrooms, darted through the tea parties, and undoubtedly found their way onto the pages of Lady Thistlewick's infamous scandal sheets, the very lifeblood of London's insatiable appetite for gossip. "Did you see Lady Elowen at Lady Danwood's rout?" one lady might murmur to another, fanning herself languidly. "Such a simple pearl necklace. One almost feels pity." "Pity? My dear, I hear they sold off everything but the family cat. She's living with some distant cousins who breed ferrets, I believe." "Ferrets? Good heavens! And yet she carries herself with such composure. One would think she was still residing in Vellamore Abbey." The sheer audacity of her presence, given her circumstances, was a subject of endless fascination. But what none of them, not even the most astute observers or the most venomous gossip-mongers, knew, was Elowen's true secret. It was a gift she guarded fiercely, a private sanctuary in a world that sought to dissect her every move. She possessed a voice of pure velvet, a mezzo-soprano that could swell with profound emotion or whisper with delicate nuance. And her hands they danced over piano keys with a fluidity that transcended mere skill, like water flowing over stones, finding harmonies and melodies hidden in the very air. It was here she recharged, found new strength and hope. It was here, in her songs and piano, she believed all over again and again that the world was a beautiful place. Indeed, this musical gift, cultivated in the quiet solitude of her childhood home, had been her escape, her confidant, and her most profound joy. When the world outside turned harsh and unforgiving, the piano had been her solace. It was a world she created, a world where titles and fortunes held no sway, where only the beauty of sound truly mattered. This secret, this hidden sonata she carried within her, was the true jewel she possessed, far more precious than any diamonds. And it was a secret she intended to keep, at least for now, letting the tongues speculate about her past while remaining utterly oblivious to the extraordinary power simmering beneath her composed surface. The season for Elowen had just begun. The game for the ton had also begun. A chance meeting, the chandeliers above, crystalline giants suspended from the ballroom ceiling, truly did sparkle like a sky of fallen stars, each facet catching the candlelight and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and the fainter, more cloying perfume of ambition, vibrated with the enthusiastic strains of a waltz. Couples twirled across the polished floor, a kaleidoscope of silks, satins, and smiles, some genuine, many carefully constructed. Lady Elowen, ever the picture of quiet grace, stood a little to one side, near a towering arrangement of exotic orchids. Their vibrant colors seemed almost too audacious for the polite restraint of the ballroom. Her dance card, a small ivory-bound booklet, hung demurely from her wrist, its pages only half filled. This was, as she well knew, less a testament to her own appeal, and more to the formidable influence of her godmother, the Duchess of Wexford, who had ensured a respectable, if not overwhelming, number of gentlemen had been persuaded to sign. Elowen watched the swirling couples, her expression serene, a faint, almost imperceptible amusement playing in her eyes. She found the grand spectacle of the season endlessly fascinating, a theatrical performance where everyone played a role, often with admirable, if transparent, dedication. It was during a particularly energetic twirl of a viscount and a rather breathless young lady that a shadow fell over her, a well-tailored shadow that exuded an aura of quiet authority. The Duke of Merrowvale, Rowan Ashcombe, a name she shared, though without a drop of shared blood or fortune, had entered her peripheral vision. He moved through the throng, not with the boisterous enthusiasm of a young buck, nor the world-weary languor of an aging roue, but with a measured elegance, an almost predatory grace. Tall, with hair the color of a raven's wing, and eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the ballroom's glittering light, he possessed the air of a man who seldom offered a smile, yet often seemed to be listening with an intensity that unnerved many. He was, to the ton, a subject of endless, whispered fascination, a wealthy enigma. He paused beside her, his presence a noticeable ripple in the air. The scent of faint citrus and something distinctly masculine, perhaps leather and old books, reached her. "And why is the most composed lady in this room not on the dance floor?" the Duke inquired, his voice a low timbre that cut through the orchestral swell without needing to be raised. He stepped just close enough for his words to be a private conversation amidst the public revelry. Elowen turned her head slowly, her gaze meeting his without a flicker of surprise or artifice. "Perhaps I prefer the music to the movement, Your Grace," she replied, her smile polite, her voice calm and level, devoid of any simpering or forced charm. It was a voice that held an unexpected depth, a quality that many found unsettling in its quiet assurance. The Duke's dark eyebrows rose a fraction, a subtle sign of amusement or perhaps genuine interest. A philosopher then, he mused, his eyes seeming to peer beyond her composed surface. Or a mystery. "I cannot quite tell." He paused, his gaze lingering on her, before adding, with a hint of something that might have been challenge, "May I have the next dance to investigate further?" Elowen's eyes, the color of moss after a spring rain, met his. There was a spark there, a quiet acceptance of his unspoken challenge. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I believe that would be acceptable, Your Grace." He offered his hand, and she laid hers in it, feeling the firm, warm contact. As they stepped onto the floor for the quadrille, a dance requiring precision and a certain elegant restraint, Elowen moved with surprising skill. She was reserved, yes, her movements understated, but undeniably graceful. She did not flirt with her fan, nor did she engage in the breathless chatter common amongst debutantes. Instead, she met his gaze with a quiet intensity, her focus entirely on the dance, her body a perfect complement to his leading. They moved as if they had danced together 1,000 times, a silent understanding passing between them, a harmony that transcended the simple steps of the quadrille. Their pairing, however, did not go unnoticed. Indeed, it became a focal point of discussion within seconds. Lady Thistlewick, whose talent for observation was only surpassed by her flair for dramatic prose, watched from the periphery, her narrow eyes glinting with professional interest. She was a woman who could turn a misplaced glove into a scandal, a whispered pleasantry into a clandestine assignation. Tonight, the sight of the Duke of Merrowvale, famously aloof and notoriously uninterested in the season's matrimonial parade, dancing with Lady Elowen Ashcombe, the very subject of so much recent speculation, was a story too rich to ignore. Lady Thistlewick's voice, though a practiced whisper, cut through the ballroom like a whispered dagger, designed to be overheard by precisely the right ears. "Lady Elowen Ashcombe," she intoned to her attentive circle, her voice dripping with mock concern, "seen dancing with the ever-aloof Duke of Merrowvale. One wonders what melodies she plays beneath that placid surface." A delicate titter ran through the small gathering. "Melodies indeed," one lady murmured, fanning herself furiously. "More likely she's humming a dirge for her family's fortune." The implication was clear. The Duke, a man of immense wealth and power, was deigning to dance with a woman of questionable financial standing. It was a social transgression, a curiosity, and to Lady Thistlewick, a headline in the making. But even as the Duke and Elowen completed their dance, a curious energy had begun to hum in the ballroom, an unspoken recognition that something unexpected had occurred. A quiet girl, with nothing but her composure and the lingering scent of orchids, had captured the attention of the man who seemed to desire nothing. The whispers now had a new direction, a fresh thread to unravel, and Elowen, though outwardly impassive, felt a flicker of something akin to satisfaction. The game, it seemed, was becoming rather interesting. The Duke of Merrowvale's unexpected attention towards Lady Elowen Ashcombe was not merely a topic of whispered fascination. For some, it was a declaration of war. Not all eyes in the ballroom had been kind, particularly those of Lady Francesca Wynne. Francesca, with her striking auburn hair, eyes the color of polished jade, and a laugh that could be as charming as it was cutting, was the unchallenged queen of the season's reigning debutantes. As the daughter of a powerful marquess, and with a dowry that could buy a small country, she had long considered herself the natural, indeed inevitable, choice for a future Duchess. And in her meticulously planned future, that Duchess was unequivocally of Merrowvale. Francesca had orchestrated her season with military precision, her dance card always overflowing, her compliments strategically placed, and her flirtations carefully calibrated. She had made it her business to be seen in the Duke's orbit, subtly placing herself near him at every ball, engaging him in lively, if slightly ostentatious, conversation at every route. The Duke, in his usual aloof manner, had treated her with polite indifference, which Francesca, with a remarkable capacity for self-deception, had interpreted as profound, unspoken admiration. So, when the Duke, with his air of detached elegance, bypassed the glittering array of eligible young ladies to seek out the modestly dressed, yet undeniably poised, Lady Elowen, Francesca's perfectly sculpted smile did not merely falter, it sharpened. Like razors, she watched them from across the room, her elegant fan snapping shut with a barely perceptible click. The audacity, she hissed to her closest confidants, Miss Penelope Featherstone and Lady Clarissa Hastings, who fluttered anxiously in her wake. "Did you see that?" He actually sought her out. Penelope, a plump, perpetually flustered young lady who clung to Francesca like a barnacle, wrung her hands. "But Lady Elowen is, well, she's quite composed, isn't she? And the Duchess of Wexford sponsors her." "Composed?" Francesca scoffed, her voice a low, furious murmur. "She's practically a statue, and as for the Duchess, Even her grace cannot conjure a fortune from thin air. Have you heard? The Duke dances with charity cases now. I suppose any lady with a title will do than one who lives in a cottage with chickens. A cruel, brittle laugh erupted from her, echoed by the nervous giggles of her companions. Clarissa, sharper than Penelope, but equally devoted to Francesca's orbit, leaned in. Is it true then, Francesca? The whispers about her family's ruin? True as the sky is blue, my dear, Francesca confirmed with relish, lowering her voice further. My mama's lady's maid heard it from the Countess of Grimsby's housekeeper, who has a cousin in Surrey. The Vellamore estate is gone, sold off to some vulgar industrialist. They're living with distant cousins, practically in a vicarage, I hear. Chickens, Clarissa, can you imagine? She shuddered dramatically, as if the mere thought of poultry soiled her exquisitely gloved hands. More laughter ensued, thin and biting. The claws went deeper, each word a venomous scratch designed to undermine Elowen's quiet composure. The very idea that the Duke of Merrowvale, a man whose lineage stretched back to the Norman conquest and whose estates rivaled those of the crown, might bestow his favor upon a lady of such diminished circumstances was an affront to Francesca's meticulously constructed social hierarchy. It was a personal insult, a challenge to her perceived destiny. He merely wishes to be seen as benevolent, I'm sure, Francesca declared, trying to soothe her own bruised ego. Perhaps he enjoys the novelty of a reclaimed lady, but novelty, like spring fashions, soon fades. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes still fixed on Elowen, who was now engaged in a polite, if animated, conversation with the Duke near the refreshment table. Their heads were close, their expressions thoughtful. This was not the fleeting, superficial interaction Francesca was used to. This was conversation. But he seems quite taken, Francesca, Penelope ventured timidly, immediately regretting it when Francesca's glare pinned her like a butterfly to a board. Nonsense, Penelope. He is a gentleman, and she is merely convenient, a temporary diversion. One cannot build a ducal dynasty on borrowed gowns and a poetic turn of phrase. What does she truly possess? No lands, no dowry, no connections of any real significance beyond the Duchess's fleeting fancy. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. She lacks substance, and the Duke, for all his eccentricities, is a man of substance. Francesca's mind began to race, a cold, calculating machine beneath her carefully arranged curls. The Duke's interest, however fleeting, was dangerous. It cast a pall over her own carefully cultivated allure. She needed to remind him, and indeed the entire ton, of Elowen's precarious position. The rumors of her family's plight were circulating. Yes, but they were vague, unconfirmed whispers. What was needed was a public, undeniable demonstration of Elowen's lowered status, something that would place her firmly beneath the acceptable standards for a potential duchess. We shall see about this novelty then, Francesca mused, a slow, malicious smile spreading across her face. Sometimes the most exquisite melodies are best heard in a drawing room, not a grand ballroom, and sometimes one must remind others of their rightful place in the grand orchestra of society. Her jade eyes, usually sparkling with vivacity, now held a glint of something cold and determined. The seed of a plan, cunning and cruel, had begun to germinate in the fertile ground of her wounded pride. She would not allow a fallen heiress, no matter how composed or subtly graceful, to usurp what she believed was rightfully hers. The season was a battlefield, and Francesca Wynne intended to be the undisputed victor, an invitation with strings. A week had passed since the memorable dance between the Duke of Merrowvale and Lady Elowen Ashcombe. A week filled with fervent speculation, heightened social maneuvering, and for Lady Francesca Wynne, a simmering, almost unbearable resentment. The whispers about Elowen hadn't died down. If anything, they had intensified, morphing from mere pity into a grudging curiosity about the Duchess of Wexford's peculiar protégé. The Duke's continued, albeit subtle, attention to Elowen at various routs and soirees only fanned the flames of Francesca's fury. He sought her out for quiet conversations in secluded corners, his dark head bent attentively towards her, a sight that made Francesca's perfectly styled coiffure feel suddenly askew. Francesca knew she needed to act decisively. The ball at Montclair House, renowned for its exquisite music and distinguished guests, offered the perfect opportunity. It was there, amidst the cultured, discerning ears of the ton, that she would execute her meticulously crafted plan. One brisk afternoon, Francesca, radiating an artificial sweetness that would make honey seem bitter, approached the Duchess of Wexford in Lady Danwood's sun-drenched drawing-room. The Duchess, a formidable woman whose piercing gaze could wither a lesser individual at 20 paces, was engaged in a surprisingly animated discussion about the merits of various new rose varietals. "Your Grace," Francesca purred, her voice a carefully modulated chime, "I hope I am not interrupting your fascinating botanical discourse." The Duchess turned, her expression unreadable. "Lady Francesca, always a delight. Though I confess, my dear, your appearance usually heralds something rather less tranquil than roses." Francesca offered a dazzling smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Your Grace, you wound me. Though perhaps you are right. I confess, I have been pondering a charming idea for the Montclair ball. It occurred to me how truly delightful it would be if Lady Elowen were to grace us with her musical talents." The Duchess's brow, famously uncreased even in moments of high drama, now acquired a faint, almost imperceptible furrow. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Lady Elowen is a guest at the ball, Lady Francesca, not an entertainer." "Heavens, no, Your Grace, you misunderstand," Francesca exclaimed, a picture of wide-eyed innocence. "I would never imply such a thing. Only, she's always so wonderfully quiet in company, isn't she? So composed, and yet I recall hearing whispers, faint whispers, of a truly remarkable talent. My mamma said she heard it from someone who visited the Ashcombe estate years ago. Wouldn't it be quite charming if she were to perform a little song? A little something on the pianoforte? So quaint and novel for an amateur, don't you agree? It would be delightful to hear her voice, a way to truly showcase her unique qualities." The words quaint and novel hung in the air, each one a subtle jab, a thinly veiled insult. The implication was clear. Francesca was suggesting Elowen perform like a paid musician, a professional, a step far beneath a lady of quality, especially one still purporting to be of the nobility. It was a thinly disguised trap, designed to expose Elowen's reduced circumstances by forcing her into a position of perceived servitude. The Duchess, with her decades of navigating the treacherous currents of the Tun, recognized the snare immediately. Her lips, usually set in a firm line, twitched with suppressed indignation. "Are you implying she performs like a paid musician, Lady Francesca?" the Duchess asked, her voice dangerously low, each word weighted with the authority of 1,000 ancestors. Francesca, however, was too caught up in the perceived cleverness of her scheme to be truly intimidated. "Heavens, no," she repeated, though her smile was now edged with a triumphant gleam. "Only a little song, Your Grace, a simple parlour piece. Think of the novelty. So few ladies, even those with talent, are so brave as to share it in such a public forum. It would be a true spectacle." The Duchess opened her mouth to deliver a scathing refusal, to dismiss Francesca with the withering glance she reserved for particularly audacious fools. But then, to her utter astonishment, a calm voice, utterly devoid of fear or even annoyance, spoke from behind her. "Let them hear me." Both women turned to see Elowen, who had entered the drawing-room quietly, unnoticed, and had clearly overheard the latter part of the conversation. She stood framed in the sunlight from the window, her simple muslin gown doing little to diminish her innate dignity. Her expression was serene, her eyes meeting Francesca's calculating gaze with an unsettling steadiness. Francesca's triumphant smile faltered. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. She had expected mortification, a stammered refusal, perhaps even tears. "If they wish to shame me for beauty," Elowen continued, her voice clear and resonant, carrying a surprising strength that seemed to fill the room, "then let them first witness it." She offered a small, polite nod towards Francesca. "I would be honored to play at the Montclair ball, Lady Francesca. Thank you for the invitation." The Duchess of Wexford stared at her goddaughter, a mixture of shock and profound admiration dawning in her eyes. Elowen had turned the blade of Francesca's malice back upon its wielder. She had not only accepted the challenge, but had done so with a quiet, unshakable confidence that transformed the intended humiliation into a declaration of self-worth. It was a tactical masterpiece, executed with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. Francesca, for once, was speechless. Her carefully constructed trap had snapped shut, but Elowen had walked through it with a step so light she hadn't even tripped. The smile that had been so perfectly fixed upon Francesca's face now looked strained, almost painful. She had intended to expose a weakness, but Elowen had presented an unexpected strength. The game, it seemed, was escalating, and the stakes were higher than Francesca had ever imagined. The quaint and novel performance was no longer a mere humiliation. It was now an opportunity, a defiance, and a potential triumph. The Hidden Sonata unleashed. The Montclair ball was a dazzling affair, a vibrant tapestry woven from London's most prominent families, richest fortunes, and keenest social climbers. Guests spilled into the grand salon, a cavernous space where gilded mirrors reflected hundreds of flickering candles, amplifying the already dazzling spectacle. Champagne bubbled in delicate flutes, its effervescence mimicking the sparkling laughter and witty repartee that filled the air. The heady scent of lilies, imported at great expense, mingled with the more pungent, undeniable aroma of gossip, a constant undercurrent to every polite conversation. Lady Francesca Wynne, resplendent in a gown of red silk, circulated with an air of barely contained triumph. She caught the eye of Lady Clarissa and Penelope, offering them a knowing, almost conspiratorial smirk. Tonight, Elowen Ashcombe would be exposed, her quiet dignity shattered by the public performance of a parlour trick. Francesca had subtly spread the word, ensuring that the room was thick with expectation, the kind that thrives on the potential for a social stumble. "I hear Lady Elowen will be providing the evening's entertainment," she'd murmured to Lord and Lady Beaumont just moments ago, affecting a tone of casual surprise. Such a brave endeavour for a young lady of her delicate constitution. The Duchess of Wexford, meanwhile, sat regally on a velvet settee, a small, unreadable smile playing on her lips. She had caught Elowen's eye earlier, offering a minute, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. There was a quiet strength in Elowen, a steel spine that the Duchess found immensely satisfying. She had prepared for a fight on Elowen's behalf, but her goddaughter had chosen to face the firing squad with a song. The moment arrived. A hush, orchestrated by a discreet footman, fell over the grand salon. Lady Montclair herself, a woman of formidable reputation, stepped forward with a polite cough. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed most fortunate tonight. Lady Elowen Ashcombe has graciously consented to share with us a musical interlude." Whispers, like a sudden gust of wind through dry leaves, rippled through the crowd. Eyes, keen and judgmental, turned towards Elowen. She stood, seemingly unfazed, by the gilded pianoforte situated on a small raised dais. She wore a gown of sky blue, simple in cut but rich in colour, its hue echoing the tranquil depth of her eyes. There were no extravagant jewels, save for a modest silver locket at her throat, a stark contrast to the glittering display of diamonds and rubies worn by many of the other ladies. She approached the instrument with a quiet dignity, her movements unhurried, almost meditative. Her gaze swept over the sea of faces, meeting curiosity, disdain, and a handful of genuine interest with an unblinking poise. She saw Francesca's expectant smirk, Lady Thistlewick's pen poised above her notebook, and the Duke of Merrowvale, Rowan Ashcombe, standing slightly apart from the crowd, his dark eyes fixed intently on her, a silent question in their depths. She seated herself gracefully on the velvet bench. Her hands, slender and elegant, hovered over the ivory and ebony keys, a momentary pause, like a bird contemplating flight. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with anticipation. Then, with a soft, almost reverent touch, her fingers descended. Music bloomed. It wasn't a parlor piece, not a familiar waltz or a popular aria. This was something entirely different. The opening notes were rich, sorrowful, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the depths of memory. It was sharp, like recollection, poignant, like a forgotten dream, weaving a complex tapestry of sound that drew every ear. The chords were intricate, unexpected, yet flowed with an innate logic, building tension, then releasing it in a wave of profound emotion. It was her own sonata, a piece she had composed in the quiet solitude of her impoverished new home, a lament for what was lost and a defiant anthem for what remained. The electronic touches, subtle yet impactful, began to weave into the melody. A shimmering, sustained synth pad provided an ethereal backdrop, creating a sense of vastness, like the endless sky. A delicate, almost crystalline arpeggio, played on a digital piano patch, danced lightly over the acoustic notes, lending a modern, almost otherworldly sparkle to the classical structure. It was an unexpected fusion, a bridge between two worlds, much like Elowen herself. Then she sang. Her voice, low and resonant, rose effortlessly above the intricate piano work. It was not the high, trilling soprano popular in the opera houses, but a mezzo-soprano of astonishing depth and clarity. It was pure velvet, each note imbued with an emotional weight that silenced the room more effectively than any shouted command. She sang a story, not in words, but in the very timbre of her voice, a tale of falling from the stars, of shattering on earthly ground, and yet of never forgetting the sky. It was a story of loss, yes, but more profoundly, a story of resilience, of an inner light that could not be extinguished. The room froze. No one coughed. No one whispered. The clinking of champagne flutes ceased. Even the usually restless debutantes stood utterly motionless, their faces captivated. The Duke of Merrowvale, Rowan Ashcombe, felt a jolt go through him. He had expected talent, perhaps even a pleasant performance, but this was something else entirely. Her voice wrapped around him, pulling him into the narrative woven by her music. It was raw, honest, and utterly without pretense. It spoke of a soul that had endured hardship, but had emerged, not broken, but refined. Francesca Wynne, who had been poised to deliver a disdainful whisper, found her lips parted, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. The scene she had orchestrated for Elowen's humiliation had become, impossibly, a platform for her triumph. The quaint little song was a masterpiece. The amateur performance was a revelation. Elowen played the final chord, a lingering, resonant note that hung in the air, slowly fading, leaving behind an almost sacred silence. Her hands rested on the keys, her head bowed for a moment, as if collecting herself from the emotional journey she had just led them on. Then, thunderous applause erupted. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a spontaneous, overwhelming roar of appreciation. Gentlemen stomped their feet, ladies waved their fans with unreserved enthusiasm, and even the most cynical dowagers found themselves clapping with uncharacteristic vigor. The Duchess of Wexford allowed herself a triumphant, almost imperceptible smile. Lady Thistlewick, whose quill had scribbled furiously throughout the performance, now paused, her eyes glinting with a new kind of excitement. She had witnessed not a scandal, but a phenomenon. Her pen resumed its furious dance across the paper, but the tone had shifted dramatically. A lady who plays like a virtuoso and sings like a siren. Lady Thistlewick's thoughts raced. Who would dare call her anything but exceptional now? The Tun has found its new darling, not despite her misfortune, but because she has risen above it with a grace that shames us all, a hidden talent truly unleashed. The Montclair ball had not witnessed a humiliation, but a coronation. Elowen, rising from the pianoforte, met Rowan's gaze across the room. There was no question in his eyes now, only a profound, silent understanding. The game had just changed. The aftermath of Elowen's performance at the Montclair ball was akin to a small, exquisite bomb detonating in the heart of the Tun. The ripples spread outward, touching every drawing room, every club, and every whispered exchange. For most, it was a moment of genuine awe, a delightful disruption to the season's predictable parade. But for Lady Francesca Wynne, it was an unmitigated disaster, a public humiliation that burned far more fiercely than any private slight. In her gilded carriage, rumbling away from Montclair House, fury reigned supreme. The plush velvet seats seemed to absorb none of her rage. Lady Clarissa and Penelope Featherstone, usually eager to echo her every sentiment, now huddled in their respective corners, their faces pale, avoiding her incandescent glare. "She's bewitched them," Francesca hissed, her voice tight with suppressed rage, barely above a whisper but vibrating with menace. "Every single one of them. Even the Duke. Did you see his face? He looked like a lovesick puppy, utterly besotted. It's utterly insufferable." She slammed her gloved fist lightly against the carriage window, the delicate thud barely audible over the clatter of hooves. "We cannot let her win. I simply cannot allow it." Penelope, always the timid one, ventured. "But Francesca, her music, it was quite extraordinary. Perhaps the Duke simply appreciated talent. Francesca rounded on her, her eyes blazing like jade embers. Talent, Penelope, is admirable in a paid musician, not a potential duchess. It's a parlor trick, a novelty, a way to garner undeserved sympathy. It changes nothing. She's still a pauper, a social climber with a pretty voice. This isn't a concert hall, it's the marriage mart. She took a shuddering breath, trying to regain her composure, though her elegant coiffure seemed to vibrate with her fury. She's merely clever. She used her impoverished state to her advantage, making herself appear a tragic heroine. But I will not stand by and let her steal what is rightfully mine. Clarissa, braver than Penelope, dared to ask, "What will you do then, Francesca?" Her Grace, the Duchess of Wexford, seemed quite pleased with her, and even Lady Thistlewick's column will sing her praises. Francesca's lips, usually curved in an arch smile, thinned into a hard, determined line. A cold, calculating gleam entered her eyes. Lady Thistlewick can pen whatever fawning nonsense she pleases. The Tun adores a rising star, but they adore a scandalous fall even more. And nothing, my dear Clarissa, is more scandalous than deceit, or poverty if it's sufficiently exposed. She leaned forward conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. We shall find out exactly how poor she is. Not merely the whispers, but the undeniable, unvarnished truth. The extent of her family's ruin. The squalor she truly lives in, not the carefully curated image she projects under the Duchess's wing. We'll expose her, not for a lack of talent, but for a lack of genuine standing, for the fraud she truly is, attempting to pass among us as if nothing has changed, Penelope gasped. But how would one even discover such private matters? Francesca gave a tight, cruel smile. My dear Penelope, in London, every secret has a price, and every kitchen maid has an aunt who knows a groom who once worked at the Vellamore estate. Information, like gossip, simply needs to be carefully extracted. And when it is, it will be undeniable. She paused, her eyes gleaming with a newfound resolve. We shall see if music can save her then. We shall see if a pretty song can mend a shattered reputation once the whole truth is laid bare. Her plan was taking shape, dark and insidious. She would not merely whisper, she would shout. She would not merely imply, she would reveal. The Montclair ball had been Elowen's triumph, but Francesca was determined that it would be merely a prelude to her utter downfall. The season, far from being over, had just entered its most dangerous act. The aftermath of Elowen's performance at the Montclair ball had done more than silence her critics. It had, quite unexpectedly, awakened a new legion of admirers. It was as if her music had shattered a long-held perception, revealing the true diamond beneath the dust of rumor. The Duke of Merrowvale, Rowan Ashcombe, had watched, a flicker of something he reluctantly identified as jealousy stirring within him, as Elowen's dance card filled with astonishing speed in the days that followed. Gentlemen who had previously overlooked her, deeming her too quiet or too financially inconvenient, now flocked to her side. Lord Ashworth, a famously eligible bachelor with a stable of prize-winning horses, suddenly found himself fascinated by her views on horticulture. Young Mr. Thistlewood, a poet of modest talent but immense enthusiasm, besieged her with sonnets dedicated to her voice. Even the staid Earl of Greymore, who usually only spoke of his hunting dogs, was observed making an earnest, albeit clumsy, attempt at witty banter with her at Lady Witherby's route. Rowan had seen it all. He observed her from across crowded ballrooms, from the edges of bustling tea parties, and even from behind discreet potted palms. He saw the admiration in their eyes, the eagerness in their smiles, the genuine, if somewhat belated, appreciation for her wit and composure. Each lingering gaze, each overly long conversation, each signed dance on her card, sent a prickle of unease through him. He, who had always viewed society's courtship rituals with a detached, almost anthropological interest, now found himself surprisingly, disturbingly invested. The idea of these men, these other men, discovering the quiet brilliance he had seen first, of perhaps winning her smile or her attention, was an unpleasant knot in his gut. His accustomed detachment had dissolved into something far more primal, a possessive instinct he hadn't known he harbored. He had spent a restless night after witnessing yet another flurry of admirers surrounding Elowen, the echo of her voice and the intricate sorrow of her sonata reverberating in his mind, now tinged with a new urgency. He was a man of logic, of meticulous accounts and sprawling estates, accustomed to navigating the world with a cool, detached rationality. Yet, Elowen's performance had bypassed all his usual defenses, striking a chord deep within him that he hadn't known existed. The public spectacle, orchestrated for her quiet humiliation, had become a profound revelation of her true self, a self that others were now just beginning to recognize and, to his irritation, pursue. It was in the Duchess of Wexford's private gardens, amidst the burgeoning roses heavy with promise, that Rowan sought her out the following morning. He moved with a renewed sense of purpose, his usual measured elegance now imbued with a subtle impatience. He found her walking slowly along a winding gravel path, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her gaze lost in the contemplation of a burgeoning rosebush. She wore a simple morning dress of pale green, the fabric soft against her figure, unadorned by frills or ribbons. She seemed entirely at peace, a stark contrast to the swirling chaos of the ballrooms she so gracefully inhabited, and the sudden flurry of attention she now commanded. He approached quietly, but with a deliberate firmness in his step. The soft crunch of his boots on the gravel eventually caught her attention, and she turned her eyes, the color of a sun-dappled forest floor, meeting his with a familiar, serene composure. There was no surprise, no flutter of nerves, merely a quiet acknowledgement. "Good morning, Lady Elowen," he began, his voice deeper than usual, tinged with a sincerity that felt almost raw in the fresh morning air. His gaze, usually so controlled, swept over her, a quiet assessment of her untouched beauty, before returning to her eyes. "Your Grace," she replied, a faint, polite smile touching her lips. "I trust your evening was eventful." He allowed himself a rare, genuine smile, though it was tinged with a self-deprecating humor. "Eventful hardly begins to describe it. One might say you have become quite the belle of the ball, Lady Elowen. Your dance card, I noticed, appeared to be quite a formidable document last night." The last sentence was delivered with a subtle, dry tone, a hint of his barely concealed irritation. Elowen's smile widened slightly, a knowing glint in her eye. She was perceptive enough to catch the unspoken note of pique. "Indeed, Your Grace, it seems the Tun has decided that a musical talent, even a modest one, is quite the fashionable accessory this season." He stepped closer, his gaze intense, searching, seeking to understand the wellspring of her quiet strength, and perhaps to stake his claim. "Music, as you said, speaks more truly than court gossip, and your point was made with remarkable clarity. You disarmed an entire ballroom with one melody. Do you realize what power that is?" His voice held a possessive undercurrent he usually kept carefully guarded. Many in that room believed they were witnessing a humiliation. Instead, they witnessed a triumph. And now, it seems, so is half of London. She looked at him then, her eyes holding a depth that few ever glimpsed. "It was merely an opportunity to be heard, Your Grace, and to quiet certain, less harmonious voices." She did not mention Francesca, but the understanding was clear between them. "You did more than quiet them, Lady Elowen. You silenced them, permanently, I suspect. He took a breath, the scent of the roses filling his lungs, steeling his resolve. The sight of Lord Ashworth hovering near her earlier that morning had been the final catalyst. He wasn't one for elaborate declarations or poetic flourishes. His world was one of directness and truth, and now a surprising urgency. Then let me speak plainly, Lady Elowen. He took another step closer, his tall frame casting a gentle shadow over her. I have spent my life observing society, rather than truly participating in it. I have witnessed the empty flirtations, the calculated smiles, the relentless pursuit of advantage. I have never desired society's approval. Indeed, I have found it rather tedious. And frankly, the recent scramble for your attention has only solidified that opinion. His gaze held hers, unwavering. But in you I found something entirely different. A quiet dignity that does not need jewels to shine. A talent that defies expectation. A spirit that is utterly unbowled by adversity. I confess, Lady Elowen, I have never desired any woman as I desire you, and I find myself disliking the idea of any other gentleman sharing your conversation, let alone your dances, he admitted, a faint flush on his own high cheekbones betraying his discomfort with such an open confession. Her composure, usually so unshakable, seemed to flicker for a fraction of a second. A faint blush touched her cheeks, a delicate bloom against her pale skin, and a genuine smile, soft and warm, played on her lips. Her eyes, usually so steady, dropped for a moment, then met his again, now sparkling with a mischievous glint. Will you, he continued, his voice softer now, almost a plea, walk this strange, judgmental world beside me, as my Duchess, as my companion, as someone who sees beyond the superficial trappings and dares to be truly herself, and as someone who will tolerate my rather newfound and uncharacteristic possessiveness? Elowen looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw not the Duke of Merrowvale, the aloof and powerful nobleman, but Rowan. She saw the genuine admiration in his eyes, the sincere plea in his voice, the quiet intensity that mirrored her own. She saw the subtle hint of jealousy, a charming admission from a man so accustomed to being outwardly impassive. His proposal was direct, honest, and utterly devoid of the empty platitudes she had come to expect from other gentlemen. He desired her, Elowen, the woman who played her own sonata, and dared to defy society's narrow expectations, not just the title she carried. Your Grace, she said, her voice a low, melodious whisper, her smile widening. That is a rather grand request for a morning amidst the roses, and a rather charming admission of possessiveness. She paused, her eyes sparkling with that same mischievous glint. Not unless you agree to dance, often and poorly. His breath hitched for a moment, and then a laugh, rare and genuine, burst from him. It was a rich, warm sound, one that surprised even himself, especially given his admission. Poorly, he chuckled, reaching for her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. My dear Lady Elowen, for you I would make an utter fool of myself on any dance floor in London, regularly, and I will gladly chase away any gentleman who dares to hover too long near your side. Her hand, when he clasped it, felt remarkably soft, yet firm. Then perhaps, she said, her smile broadening, we might make quite the pair, Your Grace. A duke who dances poorly, and a duchess who sings for her supper and who has a most wonderfully attentive duke. He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze filled with a profound sense of rightness. A most appealing proposition, Lady Elowen. A most appealing proposition indeed. The tranquility of the garden seemed to settle around them, a perfect backdrop for the quiet understanding that had just bloomed between two souls who had found each other not in the glittering spotlight of the ballroom, but in the honest light of a new day, and the surprising stirrings of a duke's heart. The morning sun, usually a herald of renewed social engagements and fresh gossip, brought with it a chill wind of a different sort for the Ashcombe family. A week after the Montclair ball, just as the buzz around Elowen's performance seemed to solidify her position as the season's new darling, a new edition of Lady Thistlewick's scandal sheet hit the breakfast tables of Mayfair. This time, its pages did not merely whisper, they shrieked. The headline, emblazoned in bold, stark type, was a direct assault. Lady Elowen titled Fraud or Fallen Heiress, the ruin behind the rose. Inside, the carefully crafted article, undoubtedly fueled by Lady Francesca Wynne's desperate machinations, meticulously detailed every agonizing aspect of the Ashcombe family's financial ruin. It spoke of her father's ill-fated investments, the crushing burden of their debts, and the ignominious sale of Vellamore Abbey. It painted a vivid, unflattering picture of their current, modest living arrangements with distant relatives in the countryside, hinting at cramped quarters and the distinct lack of the grand comforts befitting a titled family. It even went so far as to describe, with feigned sympathy, the Countess's modest living arrangements in Bath, stripping away any lingering illusion of their former grandeur. The article concluded with a scathing insinuation that Elowen's newfound popularity was a calculated deception, a desperate attempt to secure a wealthy husband before her true circumstances became utterly undeniable. Francesca had ensured the distribution was widespread, commissioning extra copies to be discreetly placed in the carriages and on the breakfast trays of every influential family in the ton. She awaited the inevitable uproar, the collective gasp of horror, the swift and decisive shunning of Lady Elowen Ashcombe. She imagined the Duke of Merrowvale, upon reading the sordid details, recoiling in disgust from such an unsuitable match. Her vindication felt imminent, a delicious certainty. However, the ton, for all its love of a juicy scandal, possessed a capricious heart, and it had, unexpectedly, developed a profound admiration for Lady Elowen. Her poise, her quiet strength, and above all, her breathtaking talent, had captivated them in a way that mere wealth or status rarely could. The very public nature of her performance at Montclair had, ironically, prepared them. They had witnessed her vulnerability and her defiance firsthand. Instead of the predicted shame, a wave of indignant protectiveness rippled through the drawing rooms. "Outrageous," declared the formidable Lady Cowper, a dowager known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, slamming the scandal sheet onto her breakfast table. "To publish such particulars! What business is it of anyone's how a lady conducts her private affairs? It's simply barbaric." "Indeed," chimed in Lady Aldridge, her eyes flashing. "Lady Elowen has never pretended to be anything but what she is. She carries her title with dignity, despite hardship. It is those who seek to tear her down who are truly without class." The Duchess of Wexford, who had anticipated such an attack, smiled faintly as she observed the reactions. She had known Elowen's strength was her honesty, even if that honesty was only truly revealed in her music. Elowen had never hidden her family's misfortune. She had simply chosen not to wallow in it. She had presented herself with composure, allowing her character to speak for itself. Her rise had been genuine, a testament to her own merits, not her family's diminished ledger. When Lady Thistlewick's next column appeared, it was a swift, decisive blow to Francesca's shattered hopes. The gossip-monger, ever keen to ride the changing tide of public opinion, had already penned her verdict, recognizing a greater story than mere financial ruin. To rise without wealth and dazzle without jewels, that is a true duchess in spirit, Lady Thistlewick wrote, her prose gleaming with admiration. While some may seek to drag down those who have faced misfortune, Lady Elowen Ashcombe has shown the ton that true worth resides not in one's ledger, but in one's soul. Her quiet grace, combined with a talent that speaks directly to the heart, makes her a lady of incomparable worth, far exceeding the fleeting shine of mere diamonds. The scandal attempt had backfired spectacularly. It had not exposed Elowen as a fraud, but rather solidified her status as a legend. Her resilience, once merely speculated upon, was now undeniably proven. The ton, in its fickle way, adored a story of triumph over adversity, especially when it was performed with such quiet, effortless grace. Francesca's malicious efforts had only served to polish Elowen's already gleaming reputation, making her not just admirable, but truly beloved. The game, it seemed, was definitively over for Lady Francesca. The conservatory at Wexford House was a haven of serene beauty, bathed in the soft, diffused light of a late spring morning. Sunlight filtered through the glass panes and the lush foliage of exotic plants, casting dappled patterns on the tiled floor and softening every corner. The air was warm, humid, with the scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the brisk London air outside, and a peaceful refuge from the ceaseless hum of the ton's social machinery. Elowen was there, tending to a delicate fern, her movements precise and gentle. She hummed softly to herself, a snippet of an unfamiliar melody, perhaps a new composition taking root in her mind. Her spirit, always resilient, had weathered the recent scandal attempt with surprising ease. The ton's unexpected embrace had not only vindicated her, but had also lifted a subtle burden she hadn't fully realized she carried. The whispers had given way to genuine admiration, and the veiled pity to something akin to respect. She felt, for the first time in a long time, truly seen, not for her circumstances, but for herself. A familiar presence entered the conservatory, his silhouette momentarily blocking the morning light. Rowan, the Duke of Merrowvale, moved towards her with an uncharacteristic quietude, as if entering a sacred space. He carried himself with his usual elegant stature, but today there was a discernible tenderness in his gaze, a vulnerability she had come to recognize. His previous confession of desire and his charmingly admitted jealousy had dismantled some of his formidable aloofness, revealing a man far more complex and appealing than society knew. "Good morning, Lady Elowen," he said, his voice a low, warm tone that perfectly matched the gentle hum of the conservatory. Elowen turned, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Your Grace, or should I say, my attentive Duke," she teased lightly, a playful glint in her eyes, referencing his earlier admission. He chuckled, a rich, pleasing sound that seemed to chase away any remaining shadows. Attentive indeed, particularly when contemplating whether some aspiring poet is once again attempting to pen you a dreadful sonnet. He took a step closer, his eyes lingering on her, filled with an emotion that bordered on reverence. "You seem remarkably unruffled by the latest public scrutiny. One might even say it has only made you shine brighter." "The truth, Your Grace, has a way of doing that," Elowen replied softly, turning back to the fern, though her attention was now entirely on him. "And the ton, it seems, prefers a good story of triumph over one of mere misfortune." Rowan came to stand directly before her, his tall form creating a private world around them amidst the verdant growth. The scent of jasmine and earth mingled with his own subtle, clean scent. He reached out, his hand gently taking hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles with a reassuring rhythm. "Indeed they do," he murmured, his gaze unwavering. "And you, Lady Elowen, are a legend in the making, a legend I find I cannot live without." He lowered himself gracefully, without fanfare or hesitation, to one knee amidst the potted palms and blooming orchids. The gesture was simple, profound, and utterly unexpected in its directness. Elowen's breath hitched, her heart fluttering like the wings of a trapped bird. Her composure, which had weathered social storms and familial ruin, threatened to abandon her. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers, filled with a raw honesty that captivated her completely. "Elowen," he began, his voice earnest, devoid of any artifice or societal expectation, "I don't ask for perfection. Society, as we both know, demands it, but I find myself weary of such a burden. What I ask for is far more precious." He squeezed her hand gently. "I ask for honesty, the kind you showed when you poured your soul into that sonata. I ask for music, not just the melodies from the pianoforte, but the harmony you bring to every quiet moment. And I ask for mornings beside you, the peace of waking to your presence, far from the clamor of Mayfair." He looked into her eyes, a silent plea in his own. "Will you do me the honor, Lady Elowen Ashcombe, of becoming my Duchess, of allowing me to spend every one of my remaining days cherishing the extraordinary woman you are, the woman who has truly awakened my world?" Elowen's eyes welled with unshed tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy and profound gratitude. Her voice, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she spoke. "Rowan," she breathed, using his given name for the first time, a sound that felt utterly natural and right. "Then I accept, and I promise you music, even on our quietest days. And a dance or two, however poorly you might perform them." A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious features. He rose, pulling her gently into his arms. The embrace was tender, reverent, a quiet promise exchanged between them. In the soft light of the conservatory, surrounded by the silent, blooming life, two souls who had navigated the tumultuous waters of society and expectation found their true haven in each other. It was a proposal built not on titles or fortunes, but on mutual respect, deep understanding, and a profound, quiet love. The kind that didn't need the grand stages of the Tun to announce its arrival, but instead bloomed like a secret flower, vibrant and true, in the heart of a garden. The morning of the wedding dawned with a sky the color of the softest robin's egg, a gentle breeze rustling through the burgeoning leaves, promising a day of warmth and quiet joy. It was not a grand, ostentatious affair, not for lack of funds, for the Duke of Merrowvale could have commanded a spectacle to rival a coronation, but by the quiet preference of the couple themselves. Elowen and Rowan desired a celebration that reflected their connection, profound, elegant, and deeply personal. The ceremony was held in the intimate, ancient chapel on the grounds of the Duchess of Wexford's country estate, a place where history whispered from every stone and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the aisle in kaleidoscopic hues. The guest list was curated with care, a blend of close family, genuinely supportive friends, and a select few influential figures from the Tun who had proven their worth through their unwavering respect for Elowen. The Duchess of Wexford, beaming with an almost unprecedented warmth, stood beside Elowen, her formidable presence softened by a genuine maternal pride. The Countess of Vellamore, Elowen's mother, had bravely ventured from Bath for the occasion, her eyes filled with tears of quiet happiness as she witnessed her daughter's triumphant vindication. Elowen walked down the aisle, not in a gown dripping with diamonds, but in a confection of ivory silk and delicate lace, exquisitely simple yet undeniably elegant. A single strand of pearls, a discreet family heirloom, adorned her neck, and her dark hair was swept up, adorned with a few fresh jasmine blossoms plucked from the very conservatory where Rowan had proposed. She carried a small bouquet of white roses, symbols of purity and enduring love. As she approached the altar, her gaze met Rowan's. His eyes, usually so guarded, were alight with an emotion that spoke volumes. a deep love, a quiet adoration, and a profound sense of having found his true north. He, typically austere in his formal attire, seemed to glow with a contained joy, a happiness that softened the sharp lines of his ducal bearing. The vows they exchanged were heartfelt, simple, and direct, mirroring the honest communication that had defined their courtship. There was no grand pronouncement of eternal passion to the world, but a quiet, firm promise to each other, a binding of souls more profound than any legal document. After the ceremony, as the newly minted Duke and Duchess of Merrowvale, they stepped out into the dappled sunlight for a reception held on the sprawling lawns. Violins soared through the air, playing a selection of classical pieces interspersed, to the delight of the guests, with snippets of melodies that sounded suspiciously like Elowen's Montclair Sonata, subtly woven into the orchestral arrangements. Lady Thistlewick, ever present, ever observant, stood slightly apart from the celebratory throng, a rare, thoughtful expression on her face. Her quill, for once, was still, but her mind was already composing the words for her most important column of the season. She had witnessed countless unions, some born of pure ambition, others of convenience, a few of genuine affection. But this was different. This was a story for the ages, a true legend blooming before her very eyes. Her gaze drifted to the newly married couple as they moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with serene smiles. The Duke, surprisingly, had already been persuaded into a few impromptu dances with several eager young ladies, and, true to his word to Elowen, performed them with an endearing, if somewhat clumsy, enthusiasm that charmed everyone. Elowen would discreetly catch his eye, a private smile passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared jest. Lady Thistlewick's thoughts began to form, crisp and clear, ready for the morning's printing presses. The Ton adores a scandal. Indeed, they feast upon it with an insatiable appetite, but they love a legend more. And Lady Elowen Ashcombe, now Duchess of Merrowvale, has cemented her place as one of the season's most enduring legends. She played her sonata not to please the crowd, though delight them she undeniably did. She played it not to impress the Duke, though impress him she certainly did. No, she played it to awaken London, to awaken herself, and to awaken the very essence of what it means to truly be seen, to be valued, not for what one possesses, but for who one is. And so, with violins soaring, the last vestiges of jealous whispers silenced, and their hearts full of a promise brighter than any spring day, the Duke and Duchess of Merrowvale danced into history, their quiet love story becoming a lasting testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in the grandest displays, but in the deepest, most unexpected corners. And so concludes our tale of the Duke and the Hidden Sonata. If you enjoyed this journey through the ballrooms of Regency London, be sure to subscribe for more captivating stories and delightful diversions from the chronicles of the Ton. We have many more secrets to reveal and many more hearts to win.